Welcome back, everybody, to the goofiest story ever told. Sovereign Citizens Part 3, History. Hello, everybody, and everybody else. My name is ScrypKat, and this is ScrypKat Says. In the second part of this series, we laid the foundation for anti-government movements of many stripes, namely Christian identity theology. This philosophical belief system underpinned most, if not all, anti-government movements starting in the 1960s. Even today, in our less religious and more secular times, this anti-Semitic, racist ideology remains the starting point of radicalization. Once a person swallows these conspiracy-laden ideas, the rest of the gobbledygook is easier to believe. In Part 3, we will be looking at the history of anti-government movements, starting with William Potter Gale and his Posse Comitatus movement. I promised we'd get to Reverend Gale, and finally, here we are. William Potter Gale was born in Minnesota in 1917. One source says he was an Army brat, but I can find no other corroboration of this fact. At the age of 16, he lied about his age and joined the Army. There he served for the next 17 years. I cannot find anything about his early career and nothing about how he went from an enlistee to an officer. At the age of 27, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel and became the youngest lieutenant colonel in the infantry. As part of General MacArthur's general staff, he helped coordinate the Filipino guerrilla warfare against the Japanese in preparation for MacArthur's famous return to the Philippines. The Disposition Board proceedings for officers, dated 14 February 1949, at the McCormick General Hospital, Pasadena, California, indicated that, quote, he was evacuated to the U.S. in April 1944 with a diagnosis of psychoneurosis anxiety state, moderate to severe, manifested by abdominal pain, indigestion, weakness, insomnia, and fatigue, cause undetermined, unquote. It must have been after April 1944 that he then served with the War Department in Washington, D.C. The records of the Military Record Center, St. Louis, Missouri, reflect June 30th, 1950 as the date he was honorably discharged. As an aside, and as a bit of foreshadowing, you might recall that President Truman integrated the armed services in July of 1948. At some point, Colonel Gale joined the John Birch Society. In 1953, he joined the Christian Identity movement because the John Birch Society would not recognize the Jewish roots of communism. He became a pastor in the Christian Identity and opened the Ministry of Christ Church. In 1957 or 58, he was a write-in candidate for governor of California on the Constitution Party platform calling for the criminal indictment of President Eisenhower over his use of the National Guard in Little Rock, Arkansas. His marriage fell apart at about this time, and by 1968 he was estranged from his children. In another bit of foreshadowing, and knowing what we know about Christian identity, did I mention that Gale was born into a practicing Jewish family? Yes, indeed. His father was Jewish. Gale penned a booklet entitled Faith of Our Fathers, in which, among other things, he stated that Jews started and profited by the Civil War, and that the 14th Amendment was never ratified. Sometime before 1971, he formed the concept of the Posse Comitatus, named for the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878, which prohibited the United States government from using federal troops to govern at the county level. Posse Comitatus is Latin for power of the county. This act was put into place because that is exactly what was happening in the South after the Civil War. The government was trying to rehabilitate the South and found it nearly impossible to do so without federal troops doing the work of local sheriffs and police. After this act was passed by Congress, Washington gave up on the South and let them do as they would. Reconstruction had failed miserably. Reverend William Potter Gale initiated the Posse Comitatus with the idea that the highest form of government should be the county sheriff. Accordingly, he stated that if the sheriff of the county refuses to carry out the will of the county's citizens, mainly refusing to foreclose or repossess property, quote, he shall be removed by the posse to the most populated intersection of streets in the township, and at high noon be hanged by the neck, the body remaining until sundown as an example to those who would subvert the law, unquote. Chilling words indeed. While Gale invented the posse comitatus, he didn't do much to organize it. That was left to a man named Henry Lamont Mike Beach, the son of a dry cleaner. He was a member of the Silver Shirts during the war. The Silver Shirts were based on Hitler's Brown Shirts. He chartered the first branch of the posse comitatus in Portland, Oregon in 1969. The posse invented such now well-known activities as paper terrorism, refusing to pay taxes or registration fees of any kind, and preparing packages of their philosophy for sale to the gullible and desperate. It has been said that Gale's genius, if you will, was in combining the raging anti-Semitic and racist Christian identity theory with legal mumbo-jumbo, then preaching it to poorly educated rural folk who pretty much ignored him until the farm crisis of the 1980s. During the 1970s, inflation caused farmers to become wildly rich, on paper at least. The government encouraged farmers to buy more land and plant more crops, and they did, loads of it, on margin. Then two things happened: the 1980 grain embargo on the USSR and the 1981 recession. Suddenly, farmers were going bankrupt left, right, and center. Farms that had been in families for 100 to 150 years were being lost to foreclosure. Enter the posse comitatus. Suddenly, the Midwest was listening, intently. One of those listening, as far back as 1967, was Gordon Kahl from North Dakota. Kahl was a decorated turret gunner in World War II. He owned a farm, but towards the end of his life bounced around the Texas oil fields as a mechanic. It was in 1967 that he wrote to the IRS stating he would no longer pay taxes to, as he put it, the synagogue of Satan under the second plank of the Communist Manifesto. During the 1970s, he organized the first Posse Comitatus chapter in Texas. In 1976, Kahl was charged with not paying his taxes for the years 1973 and 1974 and was convicted in 1977. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison and a $2,000 fine. He served 8 months. 1 year was suspended, as was the fine. He was placed on 5 years probation, and the IRS seized his land. On February 13, 1983, the U.S. Marshals attempt to arrest Kahl for violating his parole as he was leaving a Posse Comitatus meeting in Medina, North Dakota. In the car with Kahl were his wife Joan, his son Yori Vaughn, and 3 others who had been at the meeting, including Scott Fall. According to Fall's testimony, both Gordon and his son were armed with Ruger Mini-14 rifles. The U.S. Marshals attempted to apprehend the Kahls et al. Just outside Medina, and a fierce gun battle ensued. 2 marshals were killed, one of whom was shot point-blank in the head by Gordon Kahl. Kahl's son was injured and left at a clinic by his father, who ran away. Kahl was found to be at a home in Smithville, Arkansas, being aided and abetted by other Posse Comitatus members. Another firefight ensued, during which both Kahl and a sheriff were killed. Kahl's son, Yori Vaughn, is still in prison. William Potter Gale was convicted of and sent to prison for tax crimes in 1987. He died there of natural causes in 1988. At this point, I have to stop and look back beyond Gordon Kahl and William Potter Gale to the place where all this international Jewry came from. That's Jewry, not jewelry. That's right, the ever-popular and seemingly indestructible Protocols of the Elders of Zion. The Protocols first appeared in serial form in the Russian newspaper Znyamya, the Banner, in 1903. The form that has made the rounds ever since was written by Sergei Nilus in 1905 and has been translated into just about every language on earth. It has also been debunked, decried, and disproven in every language ever since. In fact, in 1921, it was found that Monsieur Nilus plagiarized his protocols from a French political satire that never even mentioned Jews. Maurice Joly's 1864 Dialogues in Hell between Machiavelli and Montesquieu. Where have I heard that name before? Montesquieu. Oh well, it'll come to me. Other investigators state that a chapter in the Prussian book Biarritz also inspired the protocols. It was a sham from start to finish. From what I can gather from the writings of many anti-conspiracy theory authors, the Protocols is the absolute starting point for just about every damn conspiracy there is on the planet today. People will just believe whatever they want to believe, I guess. Even Henry Ford published it in his newspaper in 1920, and Hitler praised him for it. If you'll recall, Ford came up with the term international Jewry. The 20s and 30s in America were a very anti-Semitic time, not our finest moment. That the world, and particularly conspiracy-minded schizotypes, managed to vomit up this tract is cause for alarm in any and all civilized societies. The fact that those who cling to this detestable volume continue to prove that they simply never matured past the age of 10 or 12 and cannot, will not take responsibility for their own actions. Those that take advantage of such immature humans should be on the top of our collective shit lists. Okay, enough personal animosity. The posse comitatus morphed in many directions through the 80s and involved armed resistance by tax protesters and the militias in the 1990s. The militias took a poke in the eye after the Murrah Building bombing in 1995 by Timothy McVeigh and friend. The militias are still out there, have no fear, but for now at least they just run around in the woods pretending the apocalypse has already happened. Being all hyped up for disaster takes its toll. However, you can only do so much prepping. The philosophy of resistance remained stable, but has now diffused into this thing we call the sovereign citizen movement. People really believe they can make themselves free of the federal government, and paper terrorism is all the rage. Obama took office in 2009, and, you guessed it, everybody in the anti-government camps went crazy. That same year, Angel Cruz took over a Bank of America in Miami, Florida, after they refused to cash a $14.3 million check. The case of Jerry and Joseph Kane, assassination of 2 police officers in West Memphis, Arkansas, is well known and was a clarion call for law enforcement all over the country. In 2013, James Timothy Turner, President of the Republic for the USA, was heard on a conference call from Ozark, Alabama, proclaiming, "We want no taxes, no mortgages, no credit card debt." To quote the Southern Poverty Law Center, like many sovereigns, Turner spent years peddling theories on mortgage relief, which in fact were simply convoluted ways to defraud the government. On March 22, 2013, a federal jury convicted him on 10 tax fraud charges stemming from seminars he held between 2007 and 2009 that purported to teach people how to tap into secret government accounts to pay their tax bill. James Buchanan Geiger was inaugurated as the 2nd president of the restored Republic for the United States of America in Memphis, Tennessee. What took them so long is not explained. Also in 2014, Cliven Bundy and a mob of sovereign citizens held off government officials in a standoff over Bureau of Land Management grazing fees. He was arrested in 2016, but was acquitted because the federal government withheld exculpatory evidence. After losing all his equipment and video footage from the pornographic films he was making, Rick Van Thiel decided to go into medicine. He was charged with practicing medicine without a license in a trailer in Las Vegas, Nevada in 2015. He performed everything from abortions, assisting at live births, to treating HIV and cancer. He was charged with killing 3 people. In his trailer were found black market steroids, blood thinners, and bags of something that looked like blood. When asked how he learned the surgical techniques he used, he responded, "From YouTube, of course." He had previously declared that he was a sovereign, not a citizen. Dr. Rick hanged himself in his cell at the Clark County Detention Center in 2017 while awaiting trial. In 2016, Cliven Bundy's son, Ammon, spearheaded another standoff with the government at a bird refuge in Oregon. The People's Rights Network was started by Ammon in 2019. During the COVID-19 pandemic, he was arrested 5 times for protests and disruptions of Idaho's COVID mitigation efforts. He lost his bid for governor in 2022. So where are we now? Right now, sovereign citizenship seems to be the leading effort to fight against government overreach. President Trump has announced he's going to run again in 2024, and the Southern Poverty Law Center says there are 733 hate groups across these United States and its territories. The only thing left to investigate, I guess, is white supremacists. Join me next week as we tackle that big fish. Remember, ScrypKat says, don't believe everything you see on the internet. Bye for now.